we can laugh at people who get taken in by QAnon or some um, conspiracy theory or set of illusions on the web, but we need to be careful not to just laugh, to realize that in varying degree we can all be taken in, and that it is incumbent on all of us to try to be careful about what we regard as the true and factual sources for things.
Yeah, especially with how ignorance is becoming such a thing where people are being so more difficult to understand each other's side.
Yeah.
That's where it
Well,
especially comes
yeah,
up to.
I mean, two things there. I mean, you're quite right. One is ignorance, and some people may be more ignorant than others, but nobody knows everything. So there's also the kind of arrogance or hubris of thinking you know things outside any area of specialization or any area of real expertise. So I
Right.
think it's not being humble before ignorance. Sometimes that's the problem, not just the ignorance. And the other thing is the extent to which people will stick to a message like it's their team. And even if your team is down, you're still going to cheer for them. And
Yeah.
they'll act as though a certain kind of false information belongs to their team, so they have to believe it and they have to stick to it no matter what evidence is presented, because it's their false information.
Yeah, and a lot of that, I believe, because what I noticed, especially too, typically on the far left side of things with the extremist groups, is that they more so tug on like the emotional ties, those personal experiences, in order to kind of get the team to go on in that manner. At least that's
Yeah,
what
I'm
I've
not
seen in my
sure
own experience.
I'm sure that's true, but it's not left or right. I think that's true of
Yeah,
both sides. So I think it'd be
yeah,
a wrong generalization to say the left tugs on emotional issues and the right doesn't. Both sides touch on emotional issues. Think of the use of images in the anti-abortion movement, or
true.
the recent accusation. Joe Biden believes that there should be sex change operations for 8 years old kids, and so that's also meant to play on something emotional when it gets to people, to not just be
Yeah,
rational. So I think it is in the nature of the combination of sort of extreme partisan opposition with the media that you get these bypasses of rational discussion in
mhm.
favor of pure emotional appeals.
Yeah, because and that's where the clickbait and the rage bait always ties into
Yeah.
effect too. And so that's why I've always kind of maintained the mentality that in order to be able to understand and accept other people's opinions and their thoughts and everything without like resorting to arguments, fights, stuff like that, I've always maintained the mindset that everything that I learn, everything that I got taught, and everything could be entirely wrong because I mean, mankind has been proved wrong time and time again before.
Sure.
So I try to maintain that mentality so that way I can not only be open to other
Good.
opinions, thoughts, and ideologies, but it gives that opportunity for me to establish the empathy and to understand it, and then be able to rebuttal with my own side as well.
Mm-hmm. No, good. I mean, I think that the combination of humility, willing to be corrected, um, and listening to whoever else you're talking to, not just wanting to tell them everything,
Yeah,
is very important. Otherwise, you can't have a dialogue. And
exactly.
it's very unlikely that everything you believe is wrong, right? It may be the case that something you believe is wrong.
Yeah,
And I think people sometimes are a little bit afraid. You're telling me I don't know anything. Well, no, I'm telling you there's this one issue on which you're probably confused.
yeah,
And I think very few people, even the people we would think are real extremists of left or right or on certain emotional issues,
hmm,
not they don't know anything. In fact,
right,
if they're able to do this, they know something. If they're able to get online, they're able to push their point of view. They may
exactly.
be distorting things, but they're not totally out of touch.
Yeah, and it's especially too because I see that often enough. At least what I constantly see on the news in regards to like looking online, all the articles, especially a lot of stuff that with Facebook and everything too. What I've been seeing on the outskirts of, well, like with colleges, universities, I could be entirely wrong on that part because I know that you're in the university, so you know exactly what's going on. But where I see like with socialism, for example, I think there was a study that came out that showed like 20% of students don't understand socialism. But there's like bias where there's clear bias that's showing to where they're only being fed this part of the argument without giving a chance to look at the other side.
So, yeah, probably. So let me give my side of that story, which would be
Yeah.
first, it's really hard to say in universities this or that because there are a lot of different universities and they're different.
Yeah.
And the some of them are very different ideologically. There are evangelical Christian universities. There are universities that are very elite and serve mainly rich and privileged kids. There are
Right.
universities that are mainly about kids who are trying to move up and improve their situation. So, there are really different universities and really different student populations. So I'd be cautious about generalizations that say this is what goes on in universities
Yeah.
on any subject. Um, on you know in general, having said that, I think it's probably true that faculty members in universities tilt more towards the center left than they tilt towards the right.
Hmm.
I don't think very many of them tilt to the extreme left.
Right.
And I think you're talking about somewhere from center to somewhat left as the
Yeah.
dominant ethos. But even there, really different. Like the studies that have been done of this show, the typical attitudes of engineering professors are really different from the typical attitudes of historians or
Yeah.
whatever. And so that doesn't mean there's no truth to what you're saying, that there are ideologies in the university. It means that you've got to be careful about generalizing too much on that. With regard to socialism, um, gee, who has the correct understanding of what socialism is? When we say, oh, well, 20% of university students don't understand it. 20% do I understand? I'm impressed. What is it they don't understand? The history of socialism in this country or in other countries,
I
the difference between socialism and communism, the particular claims of democratic socialism. I mean, what is it that they do or do not understand? I would want to ask, right? If somebody came and said, as you just said, 20% of students understand socialism, I want to know what the definition of understanding socialism was. And the same thing for understanding conservatism or
mhm.
understanding liberalism or understanding, any of these big political ideologies. You might mean their history. You might mean a sort of philosophical understanding. You might mean the practical impact they had in some context.
Right. So, and I think definitely right there, that's a good example of that generalization because my personal opinion that was on that in regards to universities and colleges, that's also someone that's stepped out from the background. And I also, me being someone who's also flooded with all these fake articles, fake news and misinformation. So I think like even that could stem because I don't think it's the entirety of the universities and colleges that do that. I know that they're going to all vary that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's as the average Joe having the lack of proper information, especially with all the fake media, I think that's where that definitely causes a misconception right there, I think.
Yeah. And, people like me don't always help because university professors will too easily fall into saying, oh, well, here's what we university professors think without
Yeah.
saying, well, actually, it's only some. I'm an economist and I think like this. But then there are other economists who think differently, let alone professors of physics who think in still another way. And so it's a bad habit of professors to speak as though they have the general truth across everything, right?
Right.
Rather than on the basis of their specific knowledge, right? So, I know some things about engineering, but if you want to know about engineering, I'm a really bad source. I know a lot more about politics, society, culture, history,
Right.
and I'm a better source on that. But even there, I don't know about every aspect of history in the world and all periods and so forth. So um, I think that part of the humility we were talking about before, even for people with PhDs and famous professors and everything else,
Mhm.
needs to be being sort of clear what you have pretty good knowledge of, what you
Right.
have some expertise on, and what you don't. And so, the world's greatest expert on political science may not be a very good authority on Shakespeare, and you shouldn't take his opinion as though it's authoritative, and vice versa.